Hey guys, tonight we saddle up and head west, way west, into the dusty, sun-baked frontier towns where the Wild West wasn't just shootouts and spurs. It was also weird food. You're trudging through the grit of some forgotten cattle town, boots scuffing dry earth. The air a strange mix of horse sweat, whiskey fumes, and someone definitely overcooked beans. There's music, a fiddler or a busted-up piano, and laughter, the kind that turns quiet when you open the saloon door. You step inside. It's dim and warm and crowded. Wooden floorboards creak beneath your boots, and a thick haze of cigar smoke floats lazily under the rafters. The bar stretches long and worn, polished by countless elbows and spilt dreams. You hear the clink of glasses and the scrape of plates. Wait, plates? Yes, because in the middle of all the poker games and arm wrestling contests, food was being served. And it was something else. Now, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and the local time in the comments. Let's see who else is up with us tonight in the saloon of the internet. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You duck your head slightly and step past the swinging saloon doors. They're always swinging, even when no one's there. It's like they know you're coming. Inside, it's packed. Rough hands grip tin mugs of questionable alcohol. Tired eyes scan poker tables, and off in a corner, someone's got stew bubbling in a dented metal pot. This is where the real Wild West happened. Not just in the gunfights, but in the bellies of the people who lived it. You're in Dodge City, maybe, or Deadwood, or a dusty spot in Arizona where the saloon is the only building with a roof that doesn't leak. It's the late 1800s. You're a traveler, a little hungry, a little broke, and a lot curious. You follow your nose toward the kitchen. First, take it all in. The smell is intense. A little bit bacon, a little bit horsehair, and something you can only describe as sharp mystery. The place runs on kerosene lamps and adrenaline. The cook, probably not trained, probably missing some teeth, is shouting over the din, slamming pans around like percussion in a band of chaos. This isn't a five-star establishment. Honestly, it might not even be legal, but it's open, and the food is hot. Saloons weren't just bars, they were everything. A community center, hotel, post office, sometimes even a courtroom if things got rowdy enough. And because travel was exhausting and dangerous and took forever, people needed to eat when they stopped. So food was part of the package, though what you got depended entirely on luck, timing, and how recently the town's only cow met its fate. Menus? Pff, not a thing. The cook served what he had. Sometimes that meant beef, sometimes that meant squirrel. And sometimes, well, let's just say you didn't ask too many questions. Historians still argue whether certain mystery meats in the more remote saloons were actually just opossums or, yes, shoe leather, softened with lard. True story? Maybe. But it made the beans go further. And beans? Oh, you'll get very familiar with beans. That's the real scent wafting through the saloon right now. Beans slow-cooked with pork fat if you were lucky, boiled alone with a pinch of salt if you weren't. No one was coming here for flavor. They were coming here to not die of starvation. The men and women around you are from every walk of life. Cowboys, miners, gamblers, bounty hunters, sometimes farmers just trying to forget about their terrible crop yield. Everyone's hungry, everyone's tired, and there's always this undercurrent of nervous energy. Because saloons are where people eat, sure, but they're also where people settle scores. It's why you keep your back to the wall. Look, there's the bartender. Big man, big mustache, wiping out a glass that will never be clean. Behind him, shelves of cheap liquor, pickled eggs floating in cloudy jars, and maybe a wheel of cheese that's been aging aggressively in public. You sidle up to the counter and ask if there's anything to eat. He squints at you. We got stew, we got beans. We got stew and beans. He grins. A gold tooth flashes. You hear someone belch in the background, then hiccup, then shout, "Four aces!" in a voice that probably means someone's about to get punched. You sit down anyway. A plate lands in front of you. It's metal. The food is hot. That's the nicest thing you can say about it. There's a thick paste of beans, maybe some unidentifiable chunks that used to move, and a slice of cornbread hard enough to qualify as a weapon. You eat it anyway. Because what else are you going to do? It's late. You're tired. And somehow, this is exactly the adventure you didn't know you needed. This isn't just dinner. It's history. It's survival. It's a slightly crunchy bite of the Old West soul. Every meal was a gamble, literally and metaphorically. As you chew and chew and chew, a piano starts up in the background. A tune you can't quite name. Maybe ragtime? Maybe someone making it up as they go. A woman in a bright red dress walks past with a tray of tin cups, winks at a miner, and vanishes into the smoke. This is the opening act of the Wild West culinary experience. The food isn't glamorous, but it's the foundation of every tall tale told around the fire, every deal made over cards, every argument that turned into a duel. And it all starts with that first bite of questionable stew in a room full of strangers, laughter, and danger. Because if you're going to eat in the Wild West, you better eat fast. You never know when someone might yell, "Draw!" You're still seated at the warped saloon table, spoon halfway to your mouth, staring at this stew that looks like someone's slow-cooked regret in a pot. But before you can talk yourself out of it, the smell wins. It's got that savory, smoky promise. The kind that says, this might taste like sadness, but at least it's warm. So, you take a bite, and... it's not the worst thing you've ever eaten. It's just... confusing. You're getting notes of something beef-adjacent, a hint of onion, a whisper of hope, and an overwhelming finish of, "We ran out of spices 5 states ago." Behind the swinging doors, the kitchen groans with life. And by kitchen, we mean a cramped back room, hot as the devil's outhouse, where one sleep-deprived cook is juggling 4 pans and swearing at a raccoon that keeps sneaking in through the window. This, my friend, is where the Wild West kitchen magic happens. Forget modern expectations. There's no sous chef, no prep team, no cold storage. What you've got back here is a single cast iron stove, an old wooden counter, and shelves stocked with dusty cans and sacks of dry goods. There might be a chicken in a cage. There might be a cat that's decided it runs the place. No one argues with the cat. Most of the ingredients come in by train or wagon, and fresh means it hasn't been sitting for more than a week. Canned tomatoes, beans, condensed milk, sacks of flour, and cornmeal. That's the Holy Trinity. If someone in the next town had a good hunting week, maybe you'll get venison. If not, it's time for Chef's Surprise. Today's surprise is stew, but not because it's a crowd favorite. It's because it lets the cook throw literally anything into one pot and hope for the best. Meat scraps, wild herbs, a splash of yesterday's coffee. It all simmers together in a bubbling medley of survival. Historians still argue whether some saloon stews contained jackrabbit, possum, or just creatively rebranded shoe leather softened overnight with lard. The cook, red-faced and sweat-slicked, ladles another portion into a bowl. He mutters something about that time the beans exploded and moves on. The saloon's pantry is a miracle of stretching the inedible into something edible. You'll find dried apples that are more bark than fruit, powdered eggs that resemble sand, and salt pork so salty it doubles as currency. If someone scored a bag of onions or a few cloves of garlic, they were hoarded like gold. One cook allegedly traded a single bulb of garlic for a bottle of whiskey and a knife that may or may not have belonged to Billy the Kid. True? Who knows? But the knife's still on the wall and no one's touching it. And yes, there were health codes, just not the kind anyone followed. Dishes got washed in the same barrel of cold water all day. A quick rinse, maybe a wipe with a slightly greasy rag, and bam, ready for the next customer. If something still had a little bit of yesterday's gravy crusted on the rim, that just meant extra flavor. Outside the kitchen, the saloon is still thumping. New arrivals roll in, brushing dust from their coats and slapping hats on tables. A prospector orders coffee thick enough to walk on. A kid in overalls begs for molasses taffy like it's treasure. Someone's playing cards near the fireplace, and an argument is brewing over who cheated at poker last night. You glance down at your bowl. You're halfway through it now. It's not bad, just aggressively functional, like it was designed more to keep you alive than to bring joy. But you're starting to respect it. This isn't the kind of meal you eat for pleasure. It's the kind you eat because your bones are cold. You've been on a horse all week, and you need something to remind you that yes, you're still alive. Then the cook yells, "Next batch is ready," and you get up to peek. Inside, he's stirring something new in a cauldron-sized pot. It looks like it might have started as chili, except now there's corn floating in it, something green that might be a pepper, and what you hope is beef. He explains between coughs that last night someone traded him a sack of chilies from New Mexico. Spicy stuff, he grins, and it's clear the stew's going to have a kick. You ask what kind of meat he's using. He shrugs. Whatever the trapper brought in. Could be rabbit, could be rattler. You stare at him. He grins again. Snakes, good protein. And here's the kicker. He's not wrong. Protein was protein. These folks didn't have time to be picky. They ate what they had and often got creative doing it. A surprising number of saloons had a signature dish. In one Nevada saloon, it was a railroad hash that legend says included chopped beef, potatoes, canned peas, and a splash of beer. In another, you could order Cowboy gumbo, which had no relation to anything served in Louisiana, but somehow always had okra. No one knew where the okra came from. Some places served potted meat, which was basically mashed up leftovers from last week, seasoned with enough pepper to stun a horse and served cold. Other spots had doughboys, fried lumps of dough that were either biscuits or hockey pucks, depending on how long they sat out. You're starting to get a feel for it now. This isn't fine dining. This is functional dining, filtered through the chaos of frontier life. But somehow it works. These makeshift kitchens and chaotic recipes kept people going. Miners, cowboys, travelers, all fueled by beans, hope, and the occasional rattlesnake stew. And when the food wasn't great, well, there was always whiskey to wash it down. A piano note clinks, sharp and out of tune. The saloon lights flicker slightly, and someone behind you starts telling a story about the time they bit into a meat pie and found a bullet. You turn back to your now empty bowl. You're full, which is a miracle in itself. And you realize that somehow this little backroom chaos kitchen, the beating heart of every Wild West saloon, has earned your respect. It's messy, it's loud, it's borderline hazardous, but it's real. And the next time someone offers you stew in a dented tin bowl, you'll remember this night and say yes without hesitation. You wipe your mouth with the back of your sleeve, because, let's be honest, napkins are a fantasy here, and lean back in your rickety chair. Your belly's full, your boots are dusty, and you've just survived your first proper saloon meal. Welcome to the club, but tonight's only getting started. From the table next to yours, a pair of cowboys argue in low tones over whether the beans had actual meat in them or just meat essence, whatever that means. You smile to yourself because you've already realized something deeper. Food out here isn't about gourmet ingredients. It's about fuel, comfort, and whatever can be cooked with one pan and a fire hot enough to scare off flies. And that brings us to cowboy cuisine, the true bedrock of Wild West saloon fare. Now, you might imagine cowboys as wild men of the prairie, riding into town with six-shooters and charm. That's only half right. The other half? They were chronically exhausted, sunburned, underpaid, and, most importantly, always hungry. The average cowboy burned around 7,000 calories a day. That's not a typo. Herding cattle across endless plains, fixing fences, dealing with stampedes, and sleeping under the stars will do that to a man. So, when cowboys came into town and hit the saloon, their number one priority wasn't whiskey or cards, it was food. Lots of it. Start with the basics, bacon and beans. You can't get more cowboy than that. Bacon came in big salted slabs that could survive for weeks without spoiling. Beans were cheap, portable, and surprisingly nutritious. Though after day 30, they probably got emotionally exhausting. You picture yourself crouched by a campfire, a tin cup in one hand, a spoon in the other. The beans are bubbling, smoky from the firewood. A strip of bacon crackles in the pan, its fat sizzling and snapping as it renders. The smell? Heavenly. Like salvation in pork form. Cowboys would often bring sourdough starter with them in jars or wrapped in cloth, lovingly known as Mother. If you were lucky, the camp cook or cookie knew how to wrangle a proper sourdough biscuit or pancake out of it. If not, you'd be chewing on something that tasted like punishment and regret. Still, a hot biscuit, even a mediocre one, beat chewing rawhide. And then there was prairie butter. Before you get excited, no, it wasn't actual butter. Prairie butter was bacon grease poured into a tin and saved for later. It was spread on cornbread, used to fry flapjacks, or just eaten straight by desperate men who had given up on their taste buds. It was rich, salty, and greasy enough to fix a wagon wheel. You try a fingertip's worth and your heart skips. Either from flavor or cholesterol, no one can be sure. Coffee was another staple. Strong, bitter, and thick enough to hold a spoon upright. It was usually made cowboy style. Chuck some grounds into boiling water and let the chaos settle. If you were fancy, you'd add crushed eggshells to reduce bitterness. If not, you just drank it as is, grit and all. A joke among trail riders was that good cowboy coffee should taste like it's already been through a horse. Twice. Some days there'd be dried apples or peaches, boiled into a lumpy mess called fruit stew. Sugar was rare and expensive, so molasses or sorghum were more common for sweetening things. You picture the saloon cook pouring thick, dark syrup onto a stack of hotcakes, watching it sink into the dough like tar. Sweetness in the West was always a little rough around the edges. And for seasoning? Salt, black pepper, maybe chili powder if someone had it. There was no oregano, no rosemary, no delicate balance of flavors. The food was blunt, honest, and usually too salty, but that's exactly what people craved after a week on the trail. There's a quiet pride in this kind of cooking. No pretensions, no presentation, just calories and grit. One pot, one pan, and one fire. That was the cowboy kitchen. And sure, it wasn't just about necessity. Cowboy cooking had its quirks and comforts too. Some cookies were actual culinary geniuses, trapped in a world of canned goods and campfire coals. They'd bake sourdough rolls in Dutch ovens buried in the coals or spice chili with whatever wild herbs they could find. One particularly famous chuck wagon cook in Texas was known for baking pies with prickly pear cactus and serving them with a side of bourbon-soaked raisins. The raisins were optional. The bourbon wasn't. Still, life on the trail was tough, and coming into town, sitting at a real table with walls, a roof, and stew that wasn't scooped from a boot, was a luxury beyond measure. The food at the saloon didn't have to be great. It just had to be better than what you cooked on the trail. And most of the time it was. Slightly. You glance around the saloon again. Everyone's eating. Some chew slowly, savoring each bite like it's a memory. Others wolf it down like they're trying to outpace death itself. Over at the bar, a cowboy is dipping cornbread into his beer. The bartender doesn't blink. This is normal here. A young kid, barely 15 maybe, shuffles in, dirty boots, sunburnt face, big hat. He slaps down a silver coin and asks for something hot. The cook serves him a bowl of beans and a chunk of jerky. No one laughs. They've all been that kid. You look at your own hands, dusty, calloused, the way the West makes everyone eventually. The spoon's still warm. You sip the last of your coffee. It's bitter, but it burns just right. Outside, the wind howls, stirring tumbleweeds like nature's exclamation marks. It's not glamorous, it's not fancy. But for a moment, under these swinging doors beneath the flickering lanterns, you understand why cowboys kept coming back. for bacon, beans, biscuits, and a brief taste of something that felt like home. You push your plate forward, satisfied, but the saloon's rhythm doesn't slow. Behind the bar, the bartender hollers another order toward the kitchen. More stew, more beans. Someone wants something with crunch. You raise an eyebrow at that. Crunch is a bold request in this town. Then again, it's time you met the mystery meat menu. You catch the cook emerging from the back, wiping his hands on an apron that's seen better decades. He's carrying a pot, something new tonight. The regulars perk up. Even the poker players glance over. The word spreads like wildfire. Fresh stew. You eye the pot. It's thick, rich, and definitely suspicious. Here's the truth about meat in the Wild West. If it walked, crawled, slithered, or sat still too long, someone probably tried to cook it. Historians still argue whether some stews served in remote saloons included creatures more often seen on the wrong end of a trap. Notably squirrels, raccoons, muskrats, and yes, even skunks with a good rinse, and the scent glands removed. Allegedly. In Texas saloons near the border, you might get armadillo meat, which locals called possum on the half-shell. In the deserts of Arizona, you'd sometimes find roasted rattlesnake, sliced thin and grilled like chicken strips. And in the pine forests of the Northwest, elk or bear could find their way into the pot, if you knew the right trapper. But here's the kicker. Saloons almost never told you what you were eating. There was no menu, no explanation, and certainly no apologies. You were served what you were served, and asking questions made you look soft. If it was chewy, spicy, and didn't bite back, you counted your blessings. Tonight's stew is chunkier than usual. You poke at it. A piece of meat falls apart on your spoon. Tender, dark, slightly gamey. Not beef, not pork, not obvious. You glance at the man next to you. He shrugs and says, "Probably jackrabbit." You nod, pretending that reassures you. It doesn't. Jackrabbit was common in these parts. Lean, tough, and with a flavor somewhere between chicken and bad decisions. You had to slow cook it for hours to make it chewable. And if it was prairie dog instead, well, chew slower and try not to think too hard. 1. Saloon in Colorado got famous for its campfire chili, a local favorite made with beans, tomatoes, and, depending on the season, either venison, snake, or mystery meat labeled only as Texas Special. Rumor had it, Tex once cooked a stew using roadkill from the nearby trail. That saloon stayed in business for 12 years. The point is, the meat was rarely fresh, never verified, and usually spiced within an inch of its life. Heavy doses of black pepper, chili powder, garlic, if you could get it, or vinegar were used not for taste, but to mask any unwelcome surprises. Food safety in the Old West wasn't a guideline. It was a gamble. But despite the uncertainty, there was something deeply communal about it. Everyone in the saloon knew they were eating the same weird stew. You'd trade theories over bites. I think it's gopher. No, definitely goat. Tastes like chicken. You've clearly never had chicken. And no matter what you guessed, the cook never confirmed. Sometimes, of course, the meat wasn't meat at all. Tofu? Please. This was the Wild West. But there were meat substitutes born of necessity. Fried flour balls soaked in broth, crushed beans formed into patties, or lard and cornmeal cakes seared to resemble sausage. One traveling salesman swore he once ate mock beef that was actually mashed potato, rolled in soot and bacon fat. He gave it 7 out of 10. And then there were the pies. Meat pies were a staple in some frontier towns, especially among saloons trying to class things up. You'd get a flaky crust, often made from flour and animal fat, and a piping hot filling of something. Could be ground beef, could be squirrel, could be yesterday's stew, reheated and thickened with flour. But when that golden crust came out of the oven, nobody complained. Warm crust covers a multitude of sins. You're handed a slice now. The bartender says it's rabbit and root, which could mean anything from carrots to old potatoes to possibly beets that lost a fight with a knife. You take a bite. It's flaky, peppery, and to your great relief, good. Really good. The kind of food that makes you close your eyes and forget where you are for just a second. Someone claps you on the shoulder. Best pie west of the Mississippi, he says proudly, then adds, unless the trapper was lying. You try not to pause mid-chew. Oddly enough, there were regional differences to these mystery meats. In California mining towns, they leaned into seafood. Canned clams, oysters, salted fish. On the plains, it was all about wild game and beef if the herds came through. Up north, you might get smoked elk or deer jerky, even roasted porcupine if things got desperate. The most bizarre dish on record? One saloon reportedly served a frontier surf and turf, consisting of smoked prairie dog and pickled oysters, flown in from San Francisco in wooden barrels. Yes, it was awful. Yes, people paid extra for it. And while some frontier folks tried to disguise strange meats with sauces, others leaned in. One saloon in Utah had a standing sign that read, "Tonight, badger or better. Ask the cook." You shake your head, chuckling softly. It's absurd. It's bizarre. It's the West. Outside, the sun is starting to set, casting an amber glow through the saloon windows. Shadows stretch long over the floorboards. The crowd's gotten louder. Poker games escalate. A man with a harmonica is trying to play. Oh, Susanna, off key. It's pure chaos. And in the middle of it, people are still eating, still chewing their way through mystery and meat, one steaming spoonful at a time. You stare down at your plate again. There's one bite left. You take it. It tastes like resilience. You barely have time to set your spoon down before the man beside you raises his tin cup in your direction. You'll want something to chase that stew down, he drawls, sliding a cloudy glass across the table. You peer into it. Whatever's inside looks like it could clean engine parts or remove paint. You take a cautious sniff. Yep, definitely saloon liquor. Welcome to the fiery, unpredictable world of liquor and liverwurst, the next course on our Wild West menu of culinary chaos. You take a tiny sip and your throat lights up like a prairie fire. It's strong, it's smoky, and it might just be 30% kerosene. Still, it does its job. Suddenly, that mystery meat stew doesn't seem so mysterious anymore. In the Old West, saloons ran on alcohol. Cheap, fast, and rarely legal by today's standards. You've got your usual suspects: whiskey, beer, and maybe some brandy if the place was feeling fancy. But the stuff being served most often? That was rotgut, an umbrella term for all the homemade or badly distilled spirits that could technically be called liquor if you were drunk enough. Most of it came in barrels with no labels. Some saloons even made their own, mixing neutral grain alcohol with tobacco juice, burnt sugar, turpentine, or even red pepper for color and bite. One popular blend, known only as cactus juice, was said to blind 3 men before noon and get better reviews than the stew. And it wasn't just for drinking. Whiskey was often used as medicine, mouthwash, disinfectant, or payment for services. One woman in Tombstone was famously paid in whiskey for her homemade pies, and promptly turned those pies into whiskey-soaked dessert bombs. The men adored her. The town doctor did not. You tip the glass back, just a bit, and immediately reach for something to eat. Anything to balance the liquid fire in your mouth. A plate of pickled pig's feet arrives, glowing pink, slightly translucent, and jiggling in a way that makes your spine itch. You stare. They stare back. The texture is somewhere between rubber boot and slippery regret. But the taste? Salty, vinegary, oddly compelling. Like punishment that grows on you. Next to the feet, sliced liverwurst served cold on a piece of week-old bread. The meat is dense, smooth, and, by frontier standards, kind of fancy. It came in tins, imported from the East or sometimes Germany if trade lines were open. Rich folks saw it as exotic. Poor folks saw it as lunch. You take a bite. It's earthy, a little metallic, and pairs surprisingly well with the burn of the whiskey. And here comes the pickled egg, a saloon staple. It's been floating in a cloudy jar behind the bar for who knows how long. Some say weeks, others years. You poke it. It wobbles but holds its shape. You eat it anyway. It's sour, tangy, and weirdly addictive. Plus, it gives your nose something to focus on besides the smell of sweat, cigars, and wet horse blankets. The more refined saloons, meaning ones with actual menus and glassware, offered other treats. Smoked sausages, dried fish, even soft cheeses. Imported goods like Limburger made an appearance occasionally, although it was quickly banned in some towns for smelling like a criminal offense. True story. One sheriff allegedly threw a wheel of cheese into the river after declaring it a biological threat. You spot a tray of sardines cracked open with a folding knife and served with mustard and saltines. Saloon goers loved sardines. They were salty, oily, and didn't need cooking. Bonus, they came with tiny keys to roll the can open, which made people feel like culinary outlaws. You ask the bartender what else is on offer. He nods toward the end of the bar. There, under a smudged glass dome, sits the free lunch spread. And here's where it gets interesting. See, many saloons offered a free lunch with the purchase of a drink. Sounds generous, right? But there was a catch. The lunch was often saltier than Neptune's bathwater. The point wasn't to feed you, it was to make you thirsty so you'd buy more drinks. And it worked. That spread usually included ham slices slick with lard, dried beef, salty crackers, pickled onions, and maybe some mystery cheese. It was a trap, and everyone knew it. But it was also food. You can't eat pride. You wander closer. The ham glistens. The crackers crumble in your fingers. The cheese is sweating and smells like old boots. You nibble anyway. It's not bad. Then you take a sip of whiskey. Suddenly, it's all quite good. A man beside you pops an entire pickled onion into his mouth, chews and exhales like a dragon. He grins and says, "Best lunch in town." You believe him. You also start sweating through your shirt. In bigger towns or boom towns flush with gold or silver, saloons up their game. Oysters on the half shell, imported in barrels of ice. Terrines of meat paste, served with toast points. Even little bowls of olives imported from Spain somehow made it to Nevada and Arizona, riding in on wagons like VIPs, but in the smaller towns, the dusty outposts, the crooked one-street setups, you were more likely to be offered liver sausage with stale crackers and a warning. Eat fast. The cat already tried once. You laugh quietly. There's something wonderful about it. Not the food, though it's growing on you, but the sheer audacity of it all. Nothing here is refined, nothing is consistent, but everything is honest. You're not being lied to with garnish and plating. You're being told plainly, here's a foot. It's pickled. Want it or not? You want it. By now, you're full of cheap meat and cheaper liquor, and the saloon has taken on that soft, golden haze of a place that's part real, part dream. A fiddle starts up in the corner. Someone's whistling off key. Cards are shuffled, bets are made. A woman laughs like she's winning at life. You sit back and soak it in. The whiskey burn, the vinegar bite, the slow melt of liverwurst on your tongue. It's weird. It's wonderful. It's the Wild West, and somehow your stomach's still asking what's next. You lean back, hand resting on your stomach like you've just survived a culinary shootout, and honestly, maybe you have. Between the pickled pig parts and mystery meat stew, you'd think the Wild West had reached its weird food ceiling. But then something catches your eye at the other end of the saloon. A man in a three-piece suit, far too clean for this place, raises a glass of what looks like champagne. He's not drinking from a tin cup. It's an actual glass flute, clear, delicate, probably stolen from a train car. And on his plate, something green, fresh, with texture, a salad. You blink. Is this still the same saloon? Turns out you've wandered into the VIP section. Yep, even in the frontier there were class divisions, and saloons knew how to cash in on them. This is the world of luxury on the frontier, and you're about to see just how high a menu could climb when gold was flowing and reputation was on the line. You walk closer, and the difference is immediate. The table has a tablecloth. The bartender is wearing a vest, and the cook, he's using tongs. Tongs! This is a saloon catering to gamblers, land speculators, wealthy ranchers, and railroad men. People with pockets deep enough to demand something a little more civilized than pickled eggs and whiskey. You take a seat, nervously, and glance at the handwritten chalkboard menu. It reads, oysters on ice, turtle soup, French rolls, veal cutlets, baked apples, champagne. Your brain tries to catch up. Turtle, veal, oysters. Let's break this down. Oysters on ice were surprisingly popular in boomtowns like San Francisco, Denver, and even Deadwood, places where money arrived faster than infrastructure. Thanks to ice shipments via rail or sea, some saloons imported barrels of oysters packed in ice and served them raw or stewed in milk. It was luxury by way of logistics. You try one now, salty, slippery, delicate. A man beside you dabs his lips with a cloth napkin and mutters, better than anything in New York. He's probably lying. Still, it's not bad. Next up, turtle soup. This was considered a delicacy, often made with green turtle meat from the Gulf or Caribbean, and thickened with spices, vegetables, and sometimes even a shot of sherry. The result? A meaty, dark stew with an oddly fishy tang. You take a spoonful. It's rich, hearty, and, dare you say it, comforting. Frontier 5-star. Now those French rolls. They're still rough around the edges, but fluffy inside. Made with lard, flour, a dash of sugar if they had any. These were often baked in Dutch ovens, lined with ashes to maintain heat. You spread some prairie butter on one. Not bad. Not Paris, but close enough if you squint. And the veal cutlets? That's a statement. Calf meat was rare in the West. Most ranchers let cattle grow to full size for more return. But in towns flush with railroad money, saloons competed to outdo one another with elegant dishes. Veal, often breaded and pan-fried, was topped with gravy or onion jam. Some even served it with sautéed mushrooms if they had a connection to a fancy supplier out east. You cut into the veal, it's tender, juicy, slightly gamey. You can almost feel your dusty trail self disappearing into a more polished version, one that might wear cufflinks if such a thing survived the wagon ride. And then there's dessert. The baked apple is soft, stuffed with raisins and cinnamon, drizzled with molasses. It smells like something out of a grandmother's kitchen. If your grandmother also ran a saloon and occasionally threatened people with a shotgun, you take a bite. It melts on your tongue, warm and sweet. You sip the champagne. It's warm, flat, and possibly not champagne, but the bubbles are there in spirit, and that's good enough. The bottle has a French label and a wax seal. Real or forged? Hard to tell. The bartender winks at you anyway. Here's what's fascinating. These luxury saloon meals weren't always about the food. They were statements. If you served champagne in a dusty town full of miners, it meant you were connected. Powerful. Worth noticing. It turned your saloon from watering hole to establishment. That's why menus like this existed, even if the ingredients had to be smuggled in by train, boat, mule, or pure nerve. Some saloons hired cooks from New Orleans, San Francisco, or Chicago to design menus that made Easterners feel at home. One legendary saloon in Virginia City had a 20-course New Year's dinner with duck à l'orange, lobster tail, caviar, and 3 kinds of pudding. Miners sat in threadbare coats and ate like kings. Most of them threw up the next day. No regrets. There were even cases where the saloon owners forged entire identities to attract elite customers. One man claimed to be a French chef trained in Lyon. He was actually from Cleveland. No one cared, as long as the roast duck had enough gravy and came with silverware. Of course, not all luxury was edible. Some upscale saloons offered cut-glass dishes, embroidered napkins, even chandeliers made from deer antlers. The food was just part of the experience, a way to make you forget that outside these walls, life was hard, dusty and often short. You swirl the last of your not champagne and glance around the room. Men are laughing louder here, talking politics, land deals, future railroad routes. This is where business happened, where fortune started and just as often ended. It's also where food became theater. A plate of smoked trout goes by, garnished with wild onions and a sprig of mint. A waiter, yes, an actual waiter, balances it like he's performed at the opera. You think about how far the saloon kitchen has come since the boiling pot of mystery stew. But just as you begin to feel settled, a loud crash erupts from the other end of the bar. A chair splinters. A man shouts, "You call that a steak?" Ah, there it is. Even in luxury, the Wild West never really forgets itself. You chuckle, polish off your apple, and rise from the table. It's time to explore the other side of the culinary coin. You nod politely to the bartender as you leave the fancy corner of the saloon, and step back into the aroma of beans, sweat, and possibility. Back in the less than luxurious part of the saloon, the one where people are playing cards with greasy fingers and using their sleeves as napkins, you feel oddly relieved. Fancy food is nice, sure, but it's also a little too clean. Too polite. And this is the Wild West, after all. You're in search of something real, something essential, something every saloon kitchen relied on to pad out a plate and keep bellies full. You're looking for cornbread. And, oh, does the West have stories to tell about this humble yellow block of survival? The cook slams a pan of it onto the bar like he's laying down a winning hand. The top's browned just right, the edges crisp. Someone immediately grabs a chunk, blows on it, and bites in. Crumbs scatter, teeth strain. You swear you hear a crack. Because here's the truth. Not all cornbread was created equal out here. Depending on the day, the cook, and the condition of his soul, cornbread could be light and fluffy, or dense enough to injure someone. It was made from a simple mix: cornmeal, salt, water, or milk, and whatever fat was on hand. Lard if you were lucky, bacon grease if you were smart. Baking powder? Maybe, maybe not. Depends on whether the store got its shipment this month. You take a bite. It's dry, but not too dry. There's a slight tang, maybe from the buttermilk, maybe from age. Hard to tell. The crust has that crunch that makes your molars feel like they've accomplished something. It's comfort food, but the kind of comfort that still makes you chew hard enough to question your life choices. Cornbread was the frontier's best friend. Cheap, fast, filling, and versatile. It could be sweet or savory, baked in skillets or Dutch ovens, eaten with beans, stew, molasses, or if times were truly desperate, just cold water. One cowboy allegedly survived a 5-day snowstorm with nothing but a single chunk of cornbread and a flask of bourbon. He later opened a saloon. Priorities. Some cooks even got experimental. You'd hear rumors of cheese cornbread, green chile cornbread, and once terrifyingly crunch cornbread made with crushed grasshoppers. Yes, actual bugs. Roasted, dried, and tossed in for extra protein and texture. Historians still debate whether this was innovation or culinary war crime. The jury's out. You look down. Your cornbread has a dark speck in it. You do not ask what it is. Instead, you try it with some molasses, poured straight from a tin jug. Thick, black, and sticky enough to hold your hat on in a windstorm. One bite and you're instantly transported. Somehow sweeter, sleepier, and maybe a little nostalgic for a childhood you never had. Cornbread wasn't just food, it was structure. People used it to soak up the last of their stew, to fill in the gaps on a sparse plate, or to trade when money was tight. A good piece of cornbread could get you a coffee refill. A great piece could get you someone's attention. Some saloons even made fried cornbread, shaped like fat pancakes and served hot with a slab of butter, or prairie butter, which we've established is just bacon grease with dreams. They were crispy outside, soft inside, and the closest thing to a hug you could order with whiskey. You hear a waitress yell, "More Johnny Cakes." That's what cornbread was sometimes called when cooked on a griddle instead of in a pan. Thin, flat, and fast, they were the express version of survival. But let's talk about what happened when things went wrong. There were infamous cornbread disasters. Burned bottoms so black they could be used for chalkboards, batches that crumbled into sand with one touch, or loaves so salty they became self-defense weapons. One saloon in Kansas kept a particularly terrible piece nailed to the wall with a sign that read, "Only man to finish this died." It's also said that one cook, notorious across 3 towns, made cornbread so dry the cows refused to eat the leftovers. He claimed it was a palate cleanser. The cows disagreed. Still, when it was good, it was sacred. Cornbread fed the workers, the soldiers, the ranch hands, the lost. It was democratic, served to both the drunk and the dignified. And unlike most saloon food, it was easy to recognize. You didn't need to ask, "What animal is this?" You already knew. It was corn. Just corn. Thank goodness. You see someone crumble theirs into a cup of hot milk. "Poor man's pudding," they say with a smile. Another man smears lard on his slice, then sprinkles it with raw sugar. Dessert, frontier style. One traveler from the East Coast who wrote in his journal about dining in an El Paso saloon in 1872 described the cornbread there as slightly sweet, aggressively firm, and oddly reassuring. He also noted that it was served with beans that had clearly lived long enough to develop personalities. As you sit there chewing, it dawns on you just how much this simple food meant to the people who passed through these doors. Cornbread was the backdrop of their stories. It was there when cattle drives ended, when poker games turned sour, when friends toasted victories or buried losses. It was humble, reliable, sometimes terrible, but it never lied. Outside, the wind whistles through the cracks in the saloon walls. You can hear the faint stomp of boots, the rustle of horses, maybe even the echo of a harmonica somewhere far off in the dusk. You take one more bite of your cornbread, washing it down with a splash of the bar's blackest coffee. It's dry, it's warm, it's home. There's a lull in the saloon now, a gentle pocket of peace between poker rounds and whiskey-fueled arguments. The fiddle has fallen silent, replaced by the soft clink of cups and murmurs of full-bellied contentment. Someone sighs deeply. Another lights a cigar with the last match in town. And right then, a plate lands on your table with an audible thunk. It's small, it's sticky, it's suspiciously shiny. Your eyebrows raise, your stomach hesitates. Ladies and gentlemen, we have reached the Sweet Tooth Showdown, that elusive, mythical world of Wild West desserts, where scarcity met sugar and dreams collided with molasses. Out here, dessert wasn't a daily thing. It was a miracle. Sugar had to be imported. Fresh fruit was a gamble. Butter, a rare luxury. And yet, humans crave sweetness. Even frontier folk trudging through heat, dust, and heartbreak needed a reason to smile with their mouths full. You poke the little square on your plate. It jiggles slightly, then holds firm. You take a bite. It's vinegar pie. Yes. Vinegar? Pie. It sounds like a dare, but it's not. Vinegar pie was a common treat when lemons were unavailable. The vinegar provided tartness mixed with sugar, eggs, and a bit of flour to make a custard-like filling. It's weirdly delicious, tangy, sweet, and richer than you expected. Across the table, a child is gnawing enthusiastically on something amber-colored, stretching it between their fingers like a sticky slingshot. That's molasses taffy, a favorite of every kid west of the Mississippi, and a dental disaster waiting to happen. Molasses was cheaper than cane sugar, shipped in barrels and used for everything from baking to bartering. Whipping it into taffy took strong arms and even stronger patience, especially when the air was thick with dust and humidity. Some saloons even had taffy pulling parties where folks would gather, boil up a batch, and stretch it in long strands, laughing, flirting, and pretending they weren't slowly coating the walls in sugar. Over in the corner, an old-timer is unwrapping something from wax paper. He pops it into his mouth and closes his eyes in bliss. You lean over. Hard candy. Peppermint, probably. Maybe cinnamon. These little sweets were gold to kids and grown-ups alike, bought from general stores or brought from far-off cities in battered tins. They were the frontier's version of treasure. And yes, the wrappers were often reused because out here nothing went to waste. You try one. It cracks loudly between your teeth, sending a wave of mint through your sinuses. It's like a punch from a candy cane. You respect it. But let's get weirder. Some saloons served apple pan dowdy, a kind of lazy pie made with spiced apples baked under a crust of biscuit dough. Others favored raisin pie, which was exactly what it sounds like. Sweetened raisins cooked in thick syrup, sandwiched between flaky crusts and usually accompanied by a loud, "Well, I'll be," from the first person to try it. You hear whispers of spider cake. No, not actual spiders. It was cornbread sweetened with sugar and milk, with a gooey center that looked suspiciously like a squash spider. It was controversial, beloved, and deeply unsettling to behold. And then there was the ever-practical dried apple pie. Since fresh fruit was rare, pioneers used rehydrated dried apples, boiled with spices and thickened with flour. Was it good? Depends who you ask. One diary from 1869 claimed, "Tastes like leather soaked in joy," which honestly feels about right. Now, let's talk innovation. One particularly daring saloon cook invented a dessert known only as grit pie, made with cornmeal, molasses, and coffee grounds. Was it a prank? Was it real? No one knows. But apparently, it had a crunchy personality and made you feel things. Historians still argue whether it was served ironically or sincerely. You sip from a cup of sweetened condensed milk, poured over a biscuit like syrup. Yep, that was a thing. Before refrigeration, condensed milk was magic in a can. Sweet, shelf-stable, and borderline addictive. Folks poured it on flapjacks, dipped cornbread in it, and in one disturbing instance mixed it with whiskey for dessert shots. The bartender called them heaven and hell. And of course, we can't forget sorghum syrup. This thick, dark, bittersweet molasses alternative was made from sorghum cane and used liberally in baking. Spread on fried bread, stirred into hot milk, or licked off fingers after a long ride, sorghum was as Western as tumbleweeds. But the crown jewel? Fried pies. Imagine dried peaches or apples rehydrated, spiced, wrapped in dough, and deep fried in lard until golden brown. Crunchy, sweet, portable, cowboy approved. These were the donuts of the desert, the Pop-Tarts of the plains. No one ever ate just one. They were often sold at roadside stands, or believe it or not, by saloon girls looking to make a little extra coin with their grandmother's recipe. You bite into one now. It's warm. The filling is sticky and tart. The crust shatters slightly under your teeth. For a second, all the roughness of the trail disappears. You're just a person eating pie, and it's everything you didn't know you missed. A miner nearby chuckles, licking syrup off his fingers. "Ain't nothing better after a week in the hills," he says. "Except maybe a bath." You raise your fried pie in silent agreement. But here's the thing about dessert in the West. It wasn't just food. It was a reward, a rare indulgence, a soft reminder that the world had sweetness tucked between its rougher corners. Even the saloons, with all their grime and grit, knew that people needed something to smile about. So whether it came in the form of molasses-soaked flapjacks, a hard candy from your coat pocket, or a sliver of vinegar pie served beside a half-spilled whiskey, dessert wasn't just an afterthought. It was survival, with sugar on top. The sweetness still lingers on your tongue as you stretch your legs and walk slowly toward the back of the saloon. The crowd has thinned a little, some folks passed out, some off, to find a bed or a card game with lower stakes. But near the hearth, a small group is gathered around a kettle, laughing and sharing bites of something steaming. Curious, you move closer. The smell is unfamiliar. Smoky, earthy, almost herbal. A plate gets passed your way. You look down and see something wrapped in flatbread, stuffed with beans, corn, and wild greens. This isn't cowboy cooking. This is indigenous influence, the unspoken foundation of so much Wild West cuisine. And you're about to taste it firsthand. You take a bite of the flatbread. It's crispy on the edges, warm and soft inside. Fried in oil, it bubbles slightly like a pillow that's been through battle and come out stronger. It's called fry bread, and it's one of the most enduring and complicated legacies of Native American cuisine in the West. Fry bread has a long, painful history. It was born from survival, created out of government-issued rations like flour, salt, and lard, during a time when many native tribes were forcibly relocated and cut off from traditional food sources. Yet over time, communities transformed it into something beautiful, adaptable, delicious, and uniquely their own. Saloons, especially those near reservations or native trade routes, often borrowed or outright stole culinary elements from the people who had lived on the land for centuries. Corn, beans, squash, the three sisters of native agriculture, became staples in stew pots and side dishes throughout the West. You remember that stew from earlier? Chances are its roots trace back to traditional succotash, a native dish of lima beans, corn, and whatever protein was on hand. Some versions included sunflower seeds or wild herbs for flavor. Others leaned into seasonal vegetables, squash, wild onions, even cactus. In fact, you spot a small pot on the fire now bubbling with a greenish, peppery liquid. A woman beside it stirs gently and says, "Challah buds and rabbit." She offers you a spoonful. It's tangy, meaty, and tastes like the desert after rain. It's incredible. In Arizona and New Mexico saloons, Pueblo-style stews were common. Blends of chili, cornmeal, and smoked meats, simmered until thick enough to eat with your fingers. These were hearty, warming meals designed to sustain, not impress. Further north, saloons near Sioux or Cheyenne communities served dishes based on buffalo meat, dried and shredded into pemmican, a portable, high-energy food mixed with fat and sometimes berries. Cowboys loved it. It kept well and tasted like jerky with a purpose. You chew a bite of pemmican now and it's dense, almost waxy. But the flavor? Deep, smoky. And the hint of dried chokecherry gives it a surprising sweetness. No seasoning necessary, just the raw essence of earth, hunt, and history. One gambler sitting nearby chuckles. "I traded a silver coin once for a bowl of Hopi stew. Best deal I ever made. Still dream about it." Historians often overlook the ways indigenous cooking shaped frontier food. But the evidence is everywhere, especially in the spices and ingredients that didn't originate in Europe. Chilies, for example, weren't some exotic Eastern treasure. They were homegrown, native to the Americas, and woven into every pot of cowboy chili or saloon hot sauce. And wild berries, service berries, chokecherries, juniper, were often foraged and used in pies, sauces, and preserves. You remember that baked apple from the fancy saloon earlier? Probably sweetened with some forgotten bush berries gathered by someone who'd been on this land long before anyone built a poker table here. Even drinks took a hint from the native sources. Yerba Buena Té, a minty herbal brew used by tribes in California and beyond, made its way into saloon menus as a frontier refresher. It calmed nerves and soothed stomachs, a welcome contrast to the fire-breathing rot-gut whiskey next to it. But it wasn't all borrowing. Sometimes it was outright collaboration. There are stories, quiet ones, of native cooks working in saloon kitchens, teaching stubborn cowhands how to roast acorns properly or how to use juniper ash to add calcium to hominy. One saloon in Oklahoma even listed Comanche chili on the wall menu, a fiery venison-packed stew laced with wild onions and dry-roasted pumpkin seeds. You watch as a group nearby passes around a bowl of blue corn mush, thick, purple-gray, and speckled with tiny seeds. You try a spoonful. It's warm, slightly nutty, and surprisingly comforting. The kind of food you eat slowly with reverence. And maybe that's the word for this section of the meal. Reverence. Because while saloons were chaotic, noisy, and often disrespectful of culture, the food somehow carried the legacy forward. Even when names were changed, recipes blurred, and credit was rarely given, these ingredients endured. They flavored the pots. They filled the bellies. They whispered stories while men shouted over poker chips. You sit quietly, chewing on the last of your fry bread, and think about the hundreds, thousands of hands that shaped this meal. Some known, some erased, all real. And as the firelight flickers against the wall, casting shadows that dance like spirits on old canyon walls, you feel it. History. Still warm, still cooking. The night deepens. Shadows stretch longer across the floor, and the flicker of oil lamps gives the saloon a cozy golden blur. The card tables have quieted slightly, the piano man's hands rest in his lap, and the fire crackles with a low, even rhythm. You're starting to feel it now, that full-bellied drowsiness that settles in after too much salt, too much sugar, and just enough whiskey. And yet, across the room, there's a new table pulling your attention. Not for the food, for the people. 3 men hunch over their plates. Wide-brimmed hats, cracked boots, dust for days. One has a scar across his cheek, another wears a battered coat held together by twine. You recognize them from old wanted posters nailed outside the sheriff's office. Outlaws, and they're eating beans. You've just found the beans and bullets crowd, the men and women who lived outside the law, yet always found their way into a saloon for a hot plate, a stiffer drink, and a few minutes pretending they weren't running from something. You pull up a chair near enough to listen, far enough to avoid getting caught in crossfire. Their plates are predictable. Tin bowls heaping with cowboy beans, some kind of jerky crumbled on top, maybe a chunk of fried bread balanced dangerously on the edge. One's pouring hot sauce over everything. So much hot sauce, in fact, that you cough just watching. And yes, let's talk about that. Hot sauce in the Wild West? Absolutely. Frontier folk loved heat, and while fancy imports were rare, homemade blends were common. People crushed dried chilies, mixed them with vinegar, sometimes a little sugar or whiskey, and called it red lightning or tongue snapper. Historians still argue whether hot sauce was a seasoning or a dare. Outlaws in particular liked their food hot and fast. They weren't sticking around for second helpings. Meals were often devoured in silence, eyes scanning the door, hands close to belts that didn't just hold up pants. You watch one man eat with shocking efficiency. 3 bites, 1 chew, gone. He eyes your plate and nods, then goes back to wiping his bowl clean with cornbread. Not a word, just survival. You glance at their table. No fancy cuts of meat here. Just salt pork, beans, maybe a boiled egg if someone traded right. It's not flashy, but it's fuel. And in their world, fuel is everything. These folks weren't just outlaws by choice. Some were former ranch hands who got cheated on pay. Some were miners who lost everything and turned to robbing payroll wagons. Some were gamblers who just couldn't stop. They came to saloons not for warmth, but for a moment of humanity, and something hot to eat before the trail called again. Over in the corner, a skinny young cowboy stirs a pot over the hearth. He's not an outlaw, not yet, but you can see it in his eyes. Something wild. He adds a spoonful of chili powder to the bubbling beans, then dumps in leftover coffee. You blink. Coffee? Yep. That's a classic move. Coffee beans and cowboy stew. It adds bitterness, deepens the flavor, and, more importantly, keeps you awake when you're sleeping one eye open with a bounty on your head. He passes you a bowl. You take a bite. It's smoky, spicy, and has that burnt edge taste of someone who learned to cook with a shovel in a fire pit. You love it. You ask what he calls it. He shrugs. Dinner. Further down the bar, a grizzled bounty hunter finishes a chunk of jerky, wipes his knife on his pants, and orders a shot of vinegar. Yes, vinegar. Apparently it helps with digestion after dry meat. Or maybe it's just to prove a point. Hard to say. The outlaw beside him complains the beans are too soft. Should crunch, he growls. Beans need attitude. That's the thing about this food. It wasn't just nourishment, it was identity. The meals matched the men. Rough, durable, sharp at the edges. Even the beans had opinions. In certain saloons, it was understood that bean stew and bread was always available. Even if the saloon was out of whiskey, out of cigars, out of everything else. You could wander in with mud on your boots and blood on your collar and still get a bowl of beans. It was democratic. It was the one thing the West offered without judgment. And don't think this was only for men. Women outlaws, yes, they existed, often carried their own recipes on the trail. One tale tells of Belle Starr, the so-called bandit queen, who rode with her own stash of cornmeal and pepper flakes and would cook johnny cakes over open fires while her gang divvied up loot. Her cakes were famous, spicy, crispy, and unapologetically burnt. Another story tells of a saloon girl turned outlaw named Cassie who made prickly pear syrup from wild cacti. She'd pour it over dried biscuits and eat them with one hand while holding a derringer in the other. They weren't eating fancy. They were eating to live? You realize that's what all these meals have in common. No matter how weird or wild every dish, from fried pies to fire breathing, beans is about endurance. Because out here, a full stomach could mean the difference between making it to the next town or not. You finish the last of your outlaw chili and sit back. The men are gone, slipped out through the rear door like smoke. Their bowls are empty, their chairs still warm, and all that remains is the scent of beans, gunpowder, and roads not taken. The night has gone full velvet. Deep shadows crawl across the saloon floor like lazy cats, and a breeze from the cracked window carries the smell of dust, horses, and far-off pine. You're full, tired, but your curiosity still burns, like the lingering taste of hot sauce on your tongue. You stand, stretch, and walk to the edge of the bar where a rail-thin man with miner's boots is telling a story to anyone who'll listen. I once paid $10 for canned peaches, he says, holding up calloused fingers for emphasis. And I'd do it again. Someone snorts. You were drunk, he shrugs. Still peaches. And just like that, you're stepping into the chaotic, desperate culinary world of the Gold Rush grub. The makeshift menus, wild improvisations, and accidental delicacies of mining camps turned saloons, where the only thing more valuable than gold was a decent meal that didn't try to kill you. You follow him out into the evening air toward a small shack down the road. Not quite a saloon, not quite a kitchen. Just a lean-to with a cook fire and a menu nailed to a post. It reads, "Tonight, beans, peaches, coffee, maybe biscuits." This is how it worked in Gold Rush towns. Miners weren't picky. After 10 hours swinging a pickaxe in freezing mud, they didn't care if the bread was stale or the bacon was older than they were. They wanted hot, filling, and fast, and they'd pay obscene amounts of money for it. In some boom towns, a single egg could go for a full day's wages. A can of oysters? A small fortune. Tonight's kitchen, if we're being generous, features 2 Dutch ovens, 1 bubbling pot, and a stack of dented tin cans. You hear the pop of one opening. "Canned peaches," the cook says with reverence. He pours the syrupy gold into a battered bowl and passes it to a customer like he's handing over a crown jewel. The man takes a slow, reverent bite. A tear forms in his eye. "Worth it," he whispers. Canned goods were a revolution during the Gold Rush. They came on boats from San Francisco, from the East Coast, even from Europe. Meat, fruit, vegetables, sealed and shipped in iron cans, opened with knives or rocks or sheer willpower. You try the peaches. They're soft, sweet, heavenly. After a week of dry biscuits and questionable jerky, this is nectar of the gods. Next comes the beans. Always the beans. They're different here. Cooked down with brown sugar, maybe a splash of molasses. A nod to Boston, sure, but made with local flair. Crushed chilies, stale beer, and a slab of salt pork the size of a hammerhead. You take a bite and nearly cry. The cook cackles. "We don't measure," he says. "We guess and hope." In the mining towns, the food wasn't just rough, it was a reflection of desperation and ingenuity. With no refrigeration and limited supply runs, cooks got creative. You might find flapjacks made with sawdust to stretch the flour, or pine pitch syrup drizzled over biscuits. It wasn't maple, but it made your teeth stick together, and that's something. One miner tells you about a dish called dynamite hash. It was rumored to contain corned beef, chopped onions, potatoes, and whatever fell in. It earned its name for two reasons. It hit your gut like an explosion, and it made you explode later. No one ever ate it twice, but everyone ate it once. Another man swears by rock soup, which wasn't a joke. Some desperate camps literally boiled river stones with salt and bone scraps, hoping to extract flavor from the memory of food. Historians still debate whether rock soup was metaphorical or very, very real. Diaries suggest both. The cook here, lean, sunburned, grinning like a raccoon, offers you a slice of baking powder biscuit. It's hard, crumbly, and slightly sour. He hands you a tin of condensed milk to drizzle on top. Suddenly, it's a dessert. He pours you a cup of coffee. Strong, bitter, boiled over flame until it could strip paint. You sip. Your soul leaves your body for a moment, then returns with clearer vision. In saloons near mining camps, coffee was sacred. It came in big black kettles and was sometimes spiked with whiskey, molasses, or even peppermint extract if someone wanted to get festive. It was served with a warning. Don't chew unless you like surprises. You sit beside the fire and listen. The miners around you aren't talking about gold. They're talking about meals. The time someone found a canned ham in a collapsed wagon. The bar in Nevada that served cold oyster stew every Tuesday. The pie made of nothing but flour, water, and rage. The man who once baked bread in his mining helmet. Food in the gold rush wasn't just sustenance. It was hope. Every bite said, "I made it one more day." It was a tiny luxury in a brutal, muddy world, full of danger and disappointment. And in a strange way, it became currency. Some camps traded in bacon like it was silver. Others valued sugar over gunpowder. And if you had canned peaches, you were basically a king, or a target. Depending on who was hungry. As the fire dies down and the night grows quieter, someone starts humming an old ballad. You finish your coffee, now lukewarm and full of grit, and realize how full your heart is. You've eaten like a miner tonight. You've tasted the makeshift, the miraculous, the barely holding it together flavor of survival. And somehow, despite the mud, the madness, and the price of peaches, it's the best dinner you've had in a long time. You rise from the miner's fire with a belly full of beans, syrupy peaches, and a sense of wonder at just how far people would go to make a meal out of next to nothing. The moon is high now, throwing pale light on the dusty street as you stroll back toward town. Your feet carry you almost without thinking, past sleeping horses and leaning storefronts, toward a line of darkened buildings gleaming with fresh steel. There's something different about this part of town. Smoother, straight. Then you hear it. The low rumble of wheels on track, the hiss of steam, the metallic click of progress arriving at midnight. You've reached the railroad edge of the West, and you're about to step into a very different dining experience. A train chuffs to a halt beside a depot lit by gaslight. From the middle car, a small set of stairs unfolds, and a man in a white jacket steps out. "Last call for the midnight menu," he says. "Welcome aboard the railroad dining car, where travelers dined on linens with silver forks, while the rest of the frontier chewed cornbread on crates." You step inside and immediately feel out of place. The floor is carpeted. The windows are clean. There are actual chairs bolted to the floor but still padded with cushions. A silver coffee urn glints in the corner beside a china cabinet that hasn't yet been broken by turbulence or angry gamblers. This is a rolling restaurant, and it has one goal: to convince passengers they are not in the Wild West. A waiter hands you a menu, a printed one. You blink. It reads, "Dinner service cream of celery soup. Baked trout with lemon sauce, mashed potatoes, and buttered carrots. apple cobbler with nutmeg cream tea, coffee, or iced lemonade. You stare. No beans, no pickled anything, no meat of unknown origin. It's not that the food is that much fancier, it's that it tries to be. Dining cars were all about illusion. They wanted you to forget the dust, the heat, the bandits, the horse manure. They wanted you to believe you were gliding through a civilized country. Railroad companies spared no expense to make it feel that way. Even in the 1870s and 80s, trains on lines like the Union Pacific or the Santa Fe had cooks, porters, china patterns, and signature dishes. They hired French chefs, trained waiters, and cooked on board using coal-fired stoves that turned every mile into a balancing act. You try the soup, light, warm, and creamy. It tastes like a spa day. The trout is flaky, buttery, and almost certainly from a lake far from here. The mashed potatoes are smooth. No surprise bits of grit or pepper bombs like you're used to at the saloon. The carrots are, well, carrots, but the butter's real. And the apple cobbler? Good heavens. It's warm, tart, cinnamon heavy, and topped with a scoop of whipped cream that defies gravity and logic. It melts in your mouth like a promise. You glance around the dining car. Men in suits sip tea with pinkies half raised. Ladies in traveling hats nibble toast and murmur about Chicago. A toddler politely throws a roll on the floor and a porter catches it midair. It's surreal. And it only highlights the gulf between train food and trail food. Out there, someone's gnawing dried venison in a rainstorm. In here, you're drinking tea from a porcelain cup. But don't get too cozy, because it wasn't all elegance. Dining cars were expensive, and the food wasn't always fresh. Canned goods made regular appearances, disguised with heavy gravies or butter. If the train was delayed or the kitchen short on supplies, the menu turned into a creative writing exercise. There's an old joke that baked pheasant on the menu meant chicken with imagination. And buttered toast with jam sometimes meant toast with nothing but hope. Meanwhile, back at the saloon, you know what's on the menu. Beans, bacon, stew, repeat. There's no illusion, no linen napkins. But there is authenticity, and fire, and character. And a guy named Hank who once bit into a biscuit so hard he dislocated his jaw. Historians still argue whether dining cars raised the standard of food in the West or just highlighted the inequality of it all. After all, you could sip champagne while watching starving settlers from your train window. Romantic in a bleak kind of way, and yet the two worlds weren't entirely separate. Saloon cooks would sometimes sneak into stationary train kitchens to learn recipes, steal spices, or bribe porters for leftover stock. Likewise, train chefs occasionally left the line and opened restaurants in dusty towns, bringing with them new flavors and techniques. One legendary saloon in Cheyenne was opened by a former train cook who introduced beef Wellington to a town that thought Wellington was a kind of horseshoe. It didn't last. People preferred their steak unwrapped and aggressively charred. Still, cross-pollination happened. Saloons started adding creamed spinach, roasted squash, and even fruit compotes to their offerings when they could. It was the beginning of the West growing up, culinarily speaking. Back on the train, you sip lemonade, ice cubes clinking in the glass. The flavor is fresh, sweet, and absurdly luxurious. You feel like you're cheating on the saloon just a little. But that's the magic of the dining car. Movement without mess, heat without fire, taste without risk. You watch the dark prairie slip by the window. Silent hills, open sky, nothing but moonlight and memory. Then the train jerks to a halt. Someone yells about a broken axle. A chicken escapes from the freight car and flaps past your window. The illusion shatters just a little. You smile, because even dressed in linen and candlelight, the Wild West always finds a way back in. You step off the train with a full belly and a slightly smug look on your face. That apple cobbler? Divine. The iced lemonade? Magic. But the minute your boots hit the dusty ground again, the illusion evaporates faster than spilled whiskey on a summer afternoon. The smell hits you first. Sweat, horses, and scorched cornbread. Then the noise, cards slapping, chairs scraping, and someone yelling something about cheating at stew. You're back in familiar territory, and just in time to witness the next course of Wild West cuisine. Food fights, etiquette, or the complete lack of it, and the most misunderstood concept in saloon history, the free lunch. You push open the doors to a saloon you haven't yet visited. The place is a bit rougher. Tables are nailed to the floor. The piano's missing half its keys. There's a chalkboard near the door that says, "No spitting in the biscuits. Last warning, you're home." Tonight's drama is already underway. A lanky cowboy with gravy on his vest is arguing loudly with a miner whose beard is currently full of biscuit crumbs. The issue? The last slice of salted pork. It's sitting on a tin plate in the middle of the table, glowing like forbidden treasure. You take a seat nearby, intrigued. The cowboy says, "I saw it first." The miner says, "I licked it." A third man leans over and eats it. The fight begins. Chairs scrape. Words fly. A biscuit becomes airborne and splatters against the wall like an angry comet. Someone hurls a boiled egg. Someone else retaliates with a ladle full of hot beans. And somehow this is completely normal. Because in the Wild West, mealtime wasn't always peaceful, especially when it came to free lunch. Let's talk about that. Free lunch wasn't free, it was bait. Saloon owners figured out early on that if they laid out a salty, carb-heavy spread, they could draw in thirsty customers who'd then spend more on drinks. It worked beautifully. Some saloons even advertised, "Buy one drink, eat like a king." Except you didn't eat like a king. You ate like a very desperate court jester. The typical free lunch table offered ham slices so thin you could read a telegram through them, crackers that expired during the Lincoln administration, pickled vegetables with the consistency of wet socks, and maybe, a pot of stew so thick it could double as mortar. The fancier spreads might include cold beans, green olives, shredded cabbage and vinegar, and thin-cut sausages that tasted vaguely of regret. But it was still food, and for many, that was enough. The rules of free lunch were simple. You had to order a drink, usually beer. You had to eat standing up. You had to fight for what you wanted. You didn't complain. Ever. If you didn't like the biscuits, tough. If the pickled onions made you cry, too bad. If the man next to you had his hands in the mashed potatoes, that's just Tuesday. Saloons didn't enforce etiquette, but they enforced order. Barely. Most had a bouncer, sometimes called the lunch sheriff, whose job was to keep people from stuffing ham into their pockets or starting duels over deviled eggs. He was paid in beer and broken plates. You hear one now? No elbows on the pickles. Followed by a solid thump and a loud apology. One story goes that in Leadville, Colorado, a fight broke out when someone claimed the cheese was haunted. Another tale tells of a man who lost 2 teeth biting into a free lunch biscuit that turned out to be a chunk of plaster. He sued. He lost. The biscuit won. Historians still argue whether the free lunch was a stroke of marketing genius or just a desperate scramble to keep people upright and somewhat sober. You sidle up to the free lunch table now. What's on offer? Cold sausage slices, uncertain species. Saltines, possibly fossilized. Pickled cabbage, glowing slightly green. Relish in a cracked jar? Something that might be pie? You try the pie, it's not sweet, it's not savory, it's confusing. You move on. Nearby, 2 men are locked in a silent battle of etiquette, each refusing to be the first to grab the last slice of cornbread. One nudges the plate, the other coughs politely. A third man walks by and takes it without blinking. The first 2 continue drinking in tense, carbohydrateless silence. Here's the thing. While food in the Wild West wasn't fancy, manners still mattered. Just not the way you'd expect. Forks were optional. Elbows on the table? Fine. Speaking with your mouth full? Encouraged, especially if you were insulting someone. But certain things were unspoken laws. You didn't take someone else's last biscuit. You didn't insult the cook, at least not within earshot. and you definitely didn't waste food. Waste was practically a sin. People scraped plates clean, chewed bones bare, and poured bean juice onto cornbread to get every last drop. One man was seen licking his plate during church service. When asked why, he simply said, "It was Tuesday." You observe as a woman in a faded dress lays out her own spread: cold chicken wrapped in cloth, a biscuit from home, and a small jar of blackberry jam. The men around her fall silent. It's not the fanciness, it's the freshness. And in a world of pickled gray and gravy brown, purple jam is a religious experience. She offers a spoonful to a nearby cowboy. He nods, thanks her, and then turns back to his stew like it's suddenly less impressive. The night wears on. Plates empty. Bellies fill. Fights simmer down to burps and apologies. One man falls asleep mid-chew, head on the table, still holding his fork like a tiny flag of surrender. You lean back, full not just from food, but from watching people in their most human form. Greedy, grateful, messy, funny, kind. All around a table full of bad biscuits and good stories. And somehow it's enough. More than enough. The hour grows late. The piano man's long since retired, his stool empty, keys silent. The fire behind the bar is down to glowing coals. You hear a gentle snore from the corner booth. Someone too full, too drunk, or just too tired to make it back to the boarding house. But you? You're wide awake. Because what you've seen so far was just the appetizer. The main course? That's now. Tonight the Wild West serves its final, strangest offerings. The eccentric, the experimental, and the downright bizarre. This is the Wild West weirdness. You wander behind the bar with a nod from the barkeep, down a back hallway into a side kitchen that smells like burned toast and desert wind. There's a cook in there, older than the saloon probably, wearing a grease-blackened apron and a grin that says, "Hope you're brave." He hands you a stick with something brown and slightly shiny on the end. "Cactus candy," he mutters. "Don't bite too fast." You nibble. Whoa, it's sweet, sticky, and vaguely vegetal, like watermelon rind dipped in molasses and set on fire. Made from prickly pear cactus paddles boiled down with sugar and citrus, this chewy confection was a specialty in the Southwest. Some loved it. Others used it to patch wagon wheels. You're undecided. Next up, burnt bread coffee. That's right. When coffee beans were scarce, some saloons got creative. They roasted stale bread, crumbled it into fine bits, and boiled it like grounds. The result? A dark, bitter brew that smelled like hope and tasted like war crimes. You sip. It tastes exactly how you expect. Like someone forgot what coffee is but still tried. And that's the spirit of Wild West weirdness. Improvisation. There were recipes born from desperation and others from sheer stubborn pride. One saloon claimed to serve rattlesnake souffle, which was actually scrambled eggs with bits of meat and a lot of branding. Another offered beaver tail fritters, pan-fried in lard with a cornmeal crust. They were crunchy, rich, and disturbingly gelatinous in the middle. But the oddest plate, the one being served right now? Roasted crickets. You pause. The cook shrugs. Plenty of protein, light on the gut. He pours them into a shallow bowl. They chirp softly as they settle. No, wait, that's just your nerves. You try one. It's salty, smoky, crunchy. Kind of like popcorn if popcorn had eyes and used to hop. Insects were a survival food, yes, but also part of indigenous diets for centuries. And some saloons, especially along trade routes, picked up the habit. Fried grasshoppers, roasted grubs, even ants soaked in honey. Historians still argue whether these were novelties or staples, but evidence suggests they were both, depending on who you asked. And speaking of novelties, a dusty recipe book from a Kansas saloon lists something called eggs and ashes. No, really. Hard-boiled eggs rolled in fireplace ash for texture and smoky depth. The verdict? crunchy, confusing, unforgivable. You peer at another pot on the stove, this one bubbling ominously. The cook grins. Skunk cabbage stew, don't worry. We boiled it 6 times. Skunk cabbage, a leafy plant with an unfortunate aroma, was sometimes eaten in the spring before real crops came in. It had to be cooked and recooked to remove toxins. You try a spoonful. You regret it. It tastes like bitterness wrapped in regret. Next up, spotted dog. Relax. It's not what it sounds like. This was actually a steamed pudding made from flour, dried fruit, sweet, and sugar. So named for the dark specks of raisins or currants that dotted the dough. Wrapped in cloth and boiled for hours, it emerged looking like a damp lump, but tasting strangely amazing. Heavy, dense, and sweet in that stick-to-your-ribs kind of way. A miner nearby slaps the table. Now that's food, he says, mouth full of spotted dog and eyes full of tears. Joy, hopefully. You chase it with something labeled red-eye gravy. It's coffee and bacon grease, mixed. Heated until separation is no longer an option. Poured over biscuits, potatoes, or anything unlucky enough to be near it. It's greasy, smoky, bitter, like breakfast after a fist fight. And still, somehow, it works. Wild West weirdness wasn't just about flavor. It was about making do, making weird, and sometimes making art. Food was medicine, memory, mistake, and miracle. You hear a story of a man who cooked an entire pot of beans using hot stones instead of a fire. Another swears he once saw a man boil cactus pads and add peppermint to make cowboy gumdrops. A bartender claims he cured a hangover with scrambled eggs, vinegar, and pickled cherries. He hasn't slept since. There's even talk of a ghost stew, a dish made with no meat, no beans, just onions, smoke, and lies, served with crackers and a straight face. You laugh, you chew, you sip something that might be soup or might be science. And somewhere deep inside the haze of wood smoke and salt, you start to understand. These weren't accidents. They were culture. The Wild West wasn't just forged in gunpowder and grit. It was stitched together through bites and slurps and strange ingredients no one else would dare eat. You finish the last of your cactus candy, wipe your mouth with your sleeve, and tip your hat to the cook. He nods solemnly, and then tosses a cricket in his mouth like it's nothing. Respect. The saloon is nearly silent now. The crowd has thinned to only the true night folk, the insomniacs, the poker addicts, and the handful of travelers too wired, or too weird, to sleep. You're none of those things. Just a visitor on a journey through time, through taste, through tales told in crumbs and grease and the clink of tin cutlery. You stretch your back, breathe in the last of the smoke-sweet air, and step outside. The night is velvet black, stars scattered like sugar across a navy tablecloth. Somewhere far off, a coyote howls. Somewhere closer, a drunk cowboy sings a lullaby to his horse. You wander down the dirt road past shuttered storefronts and lamplit porches toward one last saloon. This one's different. It's old, older than the others. Its wood is gray and cracked, its windows clouded, its sign hanging by a single nail. Inside, there's a single table, a single bartender, a single plate, already waiting. You sit down, and here it is. The final dish of the Wild West, the last saloon supper. The plate is humble, a bowl of beans, a slice of dry bread, a shot of something brown and dangerous, and a peach. Not canned, fresh. You look around. No one speaks. Even the air is still. You realize where you are now, the end of the line, the last saloons, the twilight of the frontier. As the railroad spread and cities grew, the rough, dusty, anything-goes saloons of the early Wild West began to vanish, replaced by more polished establishments with printed menus, glass windows, and waitstaff who didn't keep a pistol tucked in their apron. The law came, then prohibition, then refrigeration. People stopped eating stew that could contain anything with legs. They stopped needing to pickle everything in vinegar just to keep it from fighting back. They stopped serving meals by yelling, "Who's hungry enough to risk it?" Some say the food got better. Others say it lost its soul. Because the saloon meals were never about quality. They were about necessity, improvisation, and community. Even if that community was just a bunch of strangers chewing the same suspicious meat under the same flickering lanterns. You bite the bread. It's dry. But it tastes like the trail. You sip the whiskey. It burns. But it carries every story you've heard tonight. And then you take a bite of the peach. Software juicy. Sweet without trying. It's the first fresh thing you've tasted all night, and somehow it hits harder than anything else. Not because it's perfect, but because it's earned. Because it's the taste of a time that's ending. The bartender pours himself a shot and nods toward you. Food's different now, he says. Cleaner, colder, but not warmer. He raises his glass. You do too. To what was? You drink. You sit in silence. And the stories of every cowboy, cook, outlaw, and rail rider who ever took a bite in a dusty saloon seem to settle around you like a warm blanket. Because every pot of beans, every scorched biscuit, every slapdash stew and salt pork plate was part of something bigger. A last ragged attempt to feel human in a place that tried its hardest to forget what that meant. So now, dear traveler, you've tasted the West. Not just the beans and bacon, not just the cactus candy or the vinegar pie, but the sweat, the desperation, the rough hands, the laughter over bad stew, and the quiet respect for a meal shared even when you didn't know what it was. The Wild West Saloon was never about elegance. It was never about good taste. It was about any taste. It was a place where people came to fill more than just their stomachs, where food was a kind of hope. A bite of normal in a world full of dust, danger, and doubt. As the night deepens and the fire dies low, imagine yourself still there, leaning back in your chair, feet propped on a rail, belly full of cornbread and memory. The stars are still above you, the wind still hums through the alleyways, and the last notes of the piano linger, even though no one's played it in hours. The world has gotten quieter. The beans have stopped bubbling. The crickets are the only audience left. So close your eyes. Let the clatter of tin plates fade. Let the voices of cowboys, cooks, and gamblers drift like smoke through your dreams. Let the heat of that last spoonful of stew warm you from the inside out. You're full now, not just with food, but with stories. And somewhere in that old saloon, the cook sets down his ladle, wipes his brow, and tips his hat to you. Good night, partner.